For this next step, we're going to be practicing shading in 3 different spheres using the 3 different shading techniques along with 3 different light sources. So getting started, I'm going to just outline a circle, and this obviously wasn't a perfect circle, and I don't expect yours to be either since it's just practice, but I'm starting out with just an outline for a circle. And then I'm also creating the direction or the placement that I want the light to be coming from. So I drew my light coming off from the left side here, so you can keep it consistent and do that with your first one. And then I'm going to start thinking about where my highlight, medium tones, and shadows are going to hit. So the light source is obviously coming from the top, so that's where the lightest spot on the sphere is going to be. So I just outlined a light circle so that I, as I'm shading, am able to keep that space completely white as my highlight. And then I'm going down and just outlining where my medium tone is going to start. And instead of drawing a straight line across, I'm going to curve this line and keep that curve pretty consistent with the same curve as the bottom of the sphere. That way the sphere is able to keep form and become more three-dimensional versus a flat surface. So you always want to shade at that same angle or that same curve as the bottom of the sphere as you're drawing and getting that filled in with charcoal. So there's the medium tone right there, and then I'm outlining the darkest area where the light is not hitting along with the shadow. So my shadow, since the light is hitting the left side, is going to be cast on the right side of the object. And it obviously always helps to be looking at a reference picture. So if you want to look at a picture of a sphere and how it's shaded in while you're drawing this, that will definitely be beneficial to get more detail with the shading and the placement of everything with lighting. The last part too that's really important to include is a reflection, where the light is hitting the table or the surface and bouncing back up at the sphere. So the bottom of the sphere is where that little light reflection is going to hit. So again, this light is hitting the table, it's bouncing back up where that shadow is and hitting the darkest area underneath. So I'm leaving that space white as well. So don't forget the reflected light. And then I'm just going to start with either a 4B or 6B pencil and lightly fill everything in. When you're working with charcoal, you want to slowly build your layers, so I'm not going to start completely black in the shadow, but I'm going to just really lightly fill that in and then start to ease up my pressure as I go towards the highlight. And then I can come back and slowly darken it a little bit more. That way it's not too dark to start out with. And right now too, since we're working with gray paper, I'm going back in with the white charcoal in some of the light and medium areas. And that last part is blending it with my blending stump. So I'm using one end for the darkest area, and then you can flip it if you want to go over the white area with that as well. So here is the finished first sphere, and again this is with blending. So the last two we'll do hatching and cross hatching for. But make sure you have a highlight, medium tone shadow, the reflected light, and then the cast shadow. And everything is blended where you can't tell necessarily where one section stops and where one ends. So my medium tone and highlight blend into each other nicely, and then my shadow and medium tone as well. So we're going to move on to the second sphere here. And same thing, you could use something to help guide your outline, or if you just want to freehand it, it doesn't necessarily have to be a perfect circle, but try to keep the practice on the top half of that gray paper. If you made your first one too big or in the center, that's fine. But for practice, I want you to either use the back side of this paper or the bottom half. And for this practice, you will want to use the light gray paper, since the darker gray one is going to be that nicer paper that we'll use for your final still life. But I'm making my light source come in from the opposite direction, and I'm outlining my highlight, medium tone shadow, the reflected light, and where the cast shadow will be. And this time I am using hatching, and you'll notice as I'm drawing these lines, I'm not making them completely straight like the last practice we were doing with the value scales, but I'm curving each of those lines to follow the direction or the form of the ball. So hatching and cross-hatching is great to really emphasize form and make something even more three-dimensional, because you are following these lines. So as I'm drawing these, again, I'm following the same curve that the outside of the sphere makes. And then as you get towards the center, your lines or the curve is going to flip towards the outside of the sphere on the other direction. So I'm going to just continue shading this in. And I'm going to make my lines really lightly go all the way up into my highlight tone. And then as I get closer to the bottom where it's the darkest part of the shadow, I'm going to continue to overlap my lines a little bit more and make them shorter so that that dark is able to still fade into the medium tones and highlights. And then I'm bringing in the white charcoal in some of those highlighted areas, and I'm trying to keep my lines consistent as well. So I'm just going to keep going over it in some areas in the shadow to continue to darken it up. And then when you're finished with that last sphere, we're moving on to the cross-hatching. And I'm having my light source come from above the sphere, so that's going to just change the placement of a few things with the cast shadow and reflected light. But you're also going to be outlining everything first. With cross contour, same thing, follow the curve of the sphere, but you'll just be going across your sections. And what helps with this is going all the way across really, really lightly so that even in your medium tones you have some lines, and then continuing to go over the shadow areas with the shorter lines that don't go all the way across the sphere. So I'm going to continue bringing in those shadows, darkening them up, and then I'll go in with the white charcoal in a minute and outline the highlight and blend that a little bit more into the medium tones. So really think about blending, getting clear, clean value changes in each of these, and just trying your best to look at what's actually there in your reference picture and pick out where the highlights, medium tones, shadows, cast shadow, and everything fall.